Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a London smudged with fog and lit by flickering gas lamps. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and wet wool, and your boots squelch against the cobbles as you step out of a rattling carriage. A maid opens the door to a narrow townhome, and you're immediately enveloped in warmth, candlelight and... Was that a whisper from the drawing room? You're here for something peculiar, something thrilling, something utterly Victorian. Not a formal dinner or a game of whist, but a séance. That's right. Tonight, the host promises contact with the dead, and you're not leaving until a ghost tugs your sleeve or knocks over your teacup. The air inside smells of perfume and wax. Everyone's dressed in layers of silk and brocade, the ladies with impossibly tiny waists and towering hairstyles, the men with mutton chops and solemn expressions. One woman wears a jet black veil. She lost a husband in the Boer War. Another clutches a hair locket, curls of the dearly departed nestled inside like secrets. This is the Victorian obsession, the yearning to peer past the veil. And honestly, you might not survive this, with your skepticism intact anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The 19th century, especially the latter half, is a stew of contradictions. It's the age of railroads and rigid morality, Queen Victoria's iron rule and the Industrial Revolution, but underneath that corseted civility, a seething hunger for mystery. Grief plays a role. Queen Victoria herself, after Prince Albert's death in 1861, goes full goth widow for 40 years. She keeps his room as a shrine, orders daily linen changes, and even has hot water brought in for his morning shave, decades after he's buried. The Queen's extended mourning infects the nation. Mourning becomes fashionable, even commercial, and where there's mourning, there's curiosity about what lies beyond. Mediums spring up like dandelions, parlors fill with hopeful faces and shaky candlelight. Everyone wants to believe. Everyone wants to talk to someone who's no longer there. But it's not just sadness fueling this spiritual craze. It's also science, or the appearance of it. Victorians are newly obsessed with technology. Telegraphs let you speak across oceans. Microscopes reveal invisible life. Electricity crackles through copper wires. If those things are real, why not ghosts? The line between science and mysticism blurs like a fogged-up monocle. You hear the word magnetism tossed around a lot. Vibrations, too. And don't even get them started on energy. This is a world where the rational and irrational hold hands at the séance table. You could go from reading Darwin's Origin of Species in the morning to summoning Aunt Gertrude's spirit by candlelight in the evening, without any whiplash. The irony is delicious. A society that prides itself on propriety and reason, losing its collective mind over knocking sounds and floating trumpets. Oh, and don't think it's just a London thing. This madness spreads from Boston to Bombay. Spiritualism becomes one of the first global fads. Even colonists in dusty outposts are holding séances under palm leaf fans. Here's your first reality check. A lot of it is nonsense. There's ectoplasm made from cheesecloth, levitation achieved with a discreet toe under the table, mediums who trance out only to peek through their fingers and wink at the hostess. But here's the twist. Some folks really believe it. Deeply, devoutly, painfully. Historians still argue whether most participants truly bought into the supernatural or if it was a sort of elaborate group game, equal parts therapy, rebellion, and dinner theatre. Still, in those first candlelit years, it feels real. Convincingly real. And tonight, you're part of it. The hostess dims the lamps, asks everyone to join hands. The medium, nervous, pale, maybe just a little sweaty, asks if anyone wishes to speak to a loved one. A beat of silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. You freeze. That came from inside the table. Or did it? Someone gasps. The air thickens. Your spine tingles with both fear and the creeping suspicion you've made a terrible mistake. A glass tips over. A voice moans faintly from the hallway. You want to believe it's a spirit, but you really want to believe it's just a breeze. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, the table shudders. You're not ready for this century. You're still gripping hands around that shuddering table, trying to act like this is all perfectly normal. No big deal. Just another Saturday night in a haunted Victorian parlour. The medium exhales a trembling breath, and for a second, you could swear their eyes glint an unnatural shade of grey. Probably just the gaslight. Probably. But long before this candlelit drama and suspicious table jolting entered the scene, there was something even more curious enchanting Victorian minds. Mesmerism, a word that sounds harmlessly sleepy, like something to do with gentle lullabies and fuzzy blankets, but trust me, this was the gateway drug to full-blown spiritual obsession. Let's rewind a few decades, back to the late 18th century. That's when Franz Anton Mesmer, a German physician with a flair for theatrical robes and mysterious hand gestures, proposed that invisible magnetic fluids flowed through our bodies. And if those fluids got blocked, you'd fall ill, obviously. So, to heal you, Mesmer would wave his hands in smooth sweeping arcs, something called passes, to realign your internal magnetism. Basically, you lie on a velvet chaise while he jazz hands the ghost out of you. Now, fast forward to Victorian England, where mesmerism gets a glamorous rebrand. It's no longer just about healing, it's a gateway to trance states, dreamlike visions, and maybe communication with the dead. You see how the line blurs, right? At first, mesmerism was the domain of doctors and medical charlatans, but pretty soon, drawing rooms across the country were filled with amateur practitioners. All you needed was a flowing cape, a candlelit room, and an intense stare that said, "I probably own a secret diary written in Latin." You lie back in one of those parlors now, staring at the ceiling while someone performs slow, deliberate gestures inches above your chest. You're told to relax, to let go, to trust the invisible forces realigning your soul. Part of you wants to laugh. Another part wonders if you're floating. The sensation is oddly pleasant, like sinking into warm bath water, a faint ringing in your ears, the rustle of a crinoline dress nearby, and then, maybe, just maybe, a vision, a childhood memory, a voice not your own, and suddenly you're not laughing. Historians still argue whether these trance states were genuine hypnotic experiences, a mix of peer pressure and wishful thinking, or clever manipulation by the mesmerist. But what no one denies is that mesmerism gave people a taste of something beyond. It's not just parlour tricks either. There are mesmerists claiming to heal ailments, paralysis, depression, consumption. One even says he cured a man of baldness, although the photographic evidence is inconclusive. And of course, where there's a strange new practice, there's Queen Victoria. She and Prince Albert were famously fascinated by mesmerism, inviting practitioners to Buckingham Palace for demonstrations. You can almost picture the scene, Albert watching skeptically, Victoria clutching her fan as a courtier swoons dramatically onto a tufted ottoman. But mesmerism wasn't all royal entertainment. It also opened unexpected doors, especially for women. You see, most respectable Victorian women weren't allowed to study medicine, philosophy, or theology. But lying in a trance and spouting cosmic wisdom from the spirit realm, that was acceptable, encouraged even. So, a woman could mesmerize, or be mesmerized, and suddenly speak with the voice of ancient spirits, deliver mystical truths, or expose the sins of the men in the room. Feminist power move? A little. Scary for the patriarchy? Absolutely. Which is probably why mesmerism gets dragged into courtrooms, hospitals, and newspapers. There are trials debating its legitimacy. Doctors try to debunk it, even as they secretly experiment with it behind closed doors. One London surgeon reportedly used mesmerism as anaesthesia during amputations. Imagine falling asleep to soft whispers and waking up missing a leg. Charming. And then come the performers, the travelling mesmerists who draw enormous crowds, making people cluck like chickens or fall in love with chairs. Entire theatres are booked for these shows where the line between entertainment and enlightenment is suspiciously flexible. Is it real? Is it fake? Nobody agrees, but everyone buys a ticket. Of course, as with most fads, there's money to be made. Mesmerist manuals start popping up. 10 easy steps to control. Mine's at home. Along with courses, private sessions, and branded tools, you can even buy a special magnetic wand for the low price of your rent money. Perfect for a séance starter kit. You sit in the audience one night, watching a young man collapse on stage, arms twitching like he's receiving transmissions from Neptune. His eyes roll back, his mouth opens, and out comes poetry in Latin. It's either spiritual transcendence or a very expensive boarding school education. The audience applauds anyway. But beneath the entertainment and healing claims, there's still a flicker of mystery, a sense that maybe we don't understand everything, that our minds are more than meat and neurons, that something invisible really is flowing through us. Even today, fragments of mesmerism linger. You feel it in stage hypnosis, Reiki healing, even guided meditation apps whispering about energy centers. The language has changed, but the craving for that hidden force, that's as strong as ever. You shuffle out of the parlour a little dazed. Was that a genuine spiritual experience? Or just really good lighting and suggestion? The medium never gives you a straight answer. They just smile mysteriously, offer you a peppermint lozenge, and remind you to book next week's session in advance. Cash only, of course. You don't plan on going to another séance so soon. You tell yourself it was a one-time thing, a curiosity, a Victorian novelty you've already ticked off the bucket list. And yet, here you are again, back in someone's candle-drenched drawing room, wondering why the mahogany table in front of you is trembling slightly before the medium has even entered the room. This time, the invitation said simply, "Table turning this Thursday. Come open-minded. Wear gloves." You think they were joking about the gloves. You hope they were joking about the gloves. Table turning, or table tipping, has become the spiritual party game of the decade. All you need is a group of believers, or people polite enough to pretend, a small table with some respectable wobble in its legs, and an atmosphere thick with anticipation. You sit around the table, resting your fingertips lightly on its surface and wait. Just wait. Maybe hum a little, maybe whisper a name or two, and then, with enough focus or social pressure, the table begins to twitch. First, a little jerk, then a slow slide. Then it starts tapping out letters in code, spelling answers to whispered questions. And just like that, you're in conversation with the spirit world. You're also possibly in conversation with that enthusiastic young man opposite you, who's clearly nudging with his knees when no one's looking. But who wants to be a buzzkill? Victorians adore this kind of thing. It's spiritualism without the stagecraft. It feels democratic. Anyone can talk to the dead, no experience or spooky cloak required. Just gather your friends, serve tea, and summon grandma. Of course, the movement gets messy quickly. Rivalries sprout like overwatered ferns. Who's channeling whom? Is that table message authentic or suspiciously similar to a recent letter in the Times? And why does every ghost insist on tea with 2 sugars? To spice things up, some mediums begin adding flourishes. Cue the tulle tricks. Tulle, the sheer floaty fabric used in bridal veils and the occasional haunted ballerina, becomes an essential part of the Victorian spiritualist toolkit. Mediums hide it up their sleeves, drape it from their hair, pull it dramatically from beneath the table to simulate ectoplasm. One particularly memorable séance involves a full-bodied ghost materializing in the corner, shrouded in a shimmering veil. It hovers for a moment, emits a moan, then disappears with a rustle of fabric and a soft thud. The ghost, it turns out, tripped on a footstool and sprained her wrist. The medium blamed energetic disruption. The guests applauded anyway. Historians still argue whether these performances were intentional fraud, subconscious expression, or some weird blend of both. Were the mediums deliberately tricking people? Or were they swept up in a kind of group delusion, buoyed by the energy of their audience and the deep human desire to believe? Either way, the effect is magnetic. Parlors transform into miniature theatres. Curtains are installed to conceal ghost entrances. Mirrors are angled just right. And candles, they're never too bright. A well-shadowed séance hides a multitude of sins, or fishing wire. You sit through one such performance, perched nervously on the edge of a velvet settee. The medium is young and ethereal, with eyes that seem just a touch too wide. She slips into trance, murmuring about a sailor lost at sea. Moments later, a spectral hand appears beneath the table, a gloved, slightly clammy hand that grasps yours with conviction. You resist the urge to yelp. You also resist the urge to glance under the table. You know better. You're committed now. You nod solemnly and murmur something about lost cargo. The ghost seems satisfied. There's an odd etiquette to these séances. You don't ask too many questions. You don't call out inconsistencies. You certainly don't yank the tool and reveal a startled teenage apprentice crouching behind the drapes. That's just rude. And anyway, The Victorians want the drama, they want the mystery, they want the flickering candlelight and the trembling voices and the sudden gust of cold air that may or may not be coming from a cracked window. Even Queen Victoria, in her royal gloom, is said to have dabbled, though discreetly. Rumours swirl about spirit messages and private table sessions at Windsor. Nothing confirmed, of course. But why let the truth spoil a perfectly good ghost story? What's undeniable is the cultural reach of this phenomenon. Séances aren't just for bored housewives or grieving widows. Politicians attend, scientists take notes, journalists sneak in, scribbling observations while pretending to summon their dead goldfish. Everyone wants a glimpse beyond. And if the table doesn't tip, if the veil doesn't flutter on cue, well, that just makes it more real, doesn't it? Spirits are fickle. The afterlife is complex. Sometimes they're just busy. Besides, some of the most convincing tricks aren't even tricks. They're social. The way everyone leans forward at once, the silence that thickens the air, the shared gasp when a candle flickers too suddenly. It's not about proving anything. It's about feeling something. By the end of the evening, you're not entirely sure what happened. The table tipped. The tool danced. Someone fainted gently onto a pillow. And you? You left with the faintest impression that maybe, just maybe, someone was there. Someone else. You're not imagining it. Those same 3 knocks keep following you from séance to séance. At first, it was mildly charming. Now, it's like having a ghostly groupie. You wonder if you should start charging rent. But before you can report your spiritual squatter to the Victorian Landlords Association, someone leans over and whispers a name. The Fox Sisters. Ah yes, the original ghost influencers. It's 1848, and you're in Hydesville, New York, a sleepy little village that's about to become the birthplace of modern spiritualism. 2 teenage girls, Maggie and Kate Fox, are living in a modest farmhouse with their family. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until one night, the girls hear a series of raps. Not polite British ones, mind you. These are creepy, knuckle-on-wood, crawl-down-your-spine kinds of raps. Tap, tap, tap. The sisters start asking questions. Is someone there? Tap. Are you a spirit? Tap, tap. Soon, they're communicating with a full-fledged ghost, supposedly the restless soul of a murdered peddler buried in the basement. Conveniently dramatic. Word spreads faster than a gaslight fire. The neighbours come, then the newspapers, then the skeptics. And somehow, by sheer force of teenage charisma and supernatural savvy, the Fox sisters become famous. Not village famous, not even society page famous, world famous. You attend one of their early public séances in Rochester. The sisters stand at the front of a packed hall, their expressions solemn, their fingers barely twitching as the spirits knock back answers from the great beyond. The crowd leans forward, hearts pound, widow hats tremble. Even if you suspect mischief, your spine still tingles. The trick, if it was a trick, was brilliant. Years later, skeptics would claim the sisters produced the raps using toe joints, which honestly just makes you respect their commitment more. Historians still argue whether they were deliberate frauds, childhood pranksters who got in over their heads, or genuine channels of the unknown. One of the weirdest details, their older sister Leah becomes their manager. Think Mummager, but with more lace. She books them tours, organises performances, and helps them refine their routine. Soon they're headlining spiritualist revivals, converting crowds, and giving Victorians an answer to their darkest question. Is there more after death? You might expect the church to come down hard on this. Some clergy denounce them, of course, but others get curious. Some even collaborate. After all, if spirits can communicate, maybe that's divine proof. The Fox sisters become the faces of a movement. They help launch the Second Great Awakening, a religious and philosophical wave that mixes old Protestant fervour with shiny new spiritual ideas. Mediumship becomes a legitimate career path, especially for women. And séances? They go from fringe parlour games to full-blown cultural events, and while you're trying to wrap your head around teenage girls reinventing theology between hair braiding sessions, remember, this was the age of upheaval. Railroads, industrial accidents, wars, diseases with dramatic names like consumption. Death was everywhere. People wanted to believe. They needed to, which brings us back to Maggie. Years later, after decades of fame, touring, and increasingly public infighting, she makes a dramatic confession in New York's Academy of Music. She steps onto the stage in front of a packed house, raises her skirt just enough to show her foot, and replicates the knocking sounds. Snap, pop, knock, with her toes. You could hear the collective Victorian gasp from here. Spiritualists are crushed, skeptics cheer. But then, in true Victorian fashion, Maggie recants her confession. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe she was drunk. Maybe she missed the spotlight. Either way, it muddies the waters so thoroughly that nobody knows what to believe anymore. The sisters die poor and forgotten, buried beneath the weight of a movement they helped create. But their legacy is undeniable. You lean back from your séance table and think, those 3 knocks you keep hearing, they started right here. And if you're wondering whether modern spiritualism would exist without these 2 barefoot teenage girls cracking their joints in a dusty farmhouse, the answer is probably not. They were the first to turn the spiritual into spectacle, the first to monetize the metaphysical, the first to remind humanity that the line between performance and belief is often just a toe pop away. Tonight, you dream of tapping sounds in the walls. You wake up half expecting to find a girl in a gingham dress by your bed, cracking her knuckles with eerie precision. You try not to panic. She just wants to talk. Your dreams last night were noisy, full of tapping, shuffling, and ghostly teenage side-eyes. But morning has come. Sort of. In Victorian London, the fog never really leaves. It just changes texture. You're on your way to the drawing room of Lady Theodora Merton Wright, a woman with 3 chins, 2 canaries, and 1 very famous medium. Her invitation promised a dazzling and most elevated spiritual entertainment, which, in plain English, means a séance with famous guests, fancy snacks, and at least 1 ghostly voice yelling about overdue wills. You arrive to find the parlour already dimmed. A blue velvet tablecloth drapes the centre table, embroidered with symbols you're pretty sure someone just made up for dramatic effect. Candles flicker. A harp plays itself softly in the corner. Okay, someone is behind that curtain with a harp, but you're trying to suspend disbelief. This is the peak of celebrity mediumship, and the Victorians are all in. Everyone wants to see the dead, especially if it's done by someone who's been profiled in the Times, or maybe attended a duchess's birthday séance. You sit beside a man who claims to have attended 15 séances this month alone. He smells like old cigars and misguided confidence. And then she enters, Madame Celestina, the medium, dressed head to toe in black lace, hair piled high, face pale with a hint of theatrical lavender powder. Her eyes sweep the room like she already knows who's lost a cousin in a shipwreck or who's hiding a secret affair with a footman. She greets no one. She floats to her chair, rests her fingertips on the table and exhales as if releasing all the air between this world and the next. The séance begins. You know the drill by now. Everyone holds hands, the lights dim further, and Madame Celestina starts humming. It's somewhere between Gregorian chant and Please Don't Sneeze. And then, action. The table trembles, a trumpet levitates, spins slowly, and then tips to one side. A voice emerges. It's gravelly. It's slightly Irish. It's Uncle Patrick, here to apologise for cheating at cards in 1839. The guests murmur appreciatively. Now a tambourine rattles, a bell chimes. The room grows cold. One woman faints gently into a plush armchair, dabbing at her forehead with a perfumed handkerchief. Not to be outdone, the canary in the hallway faints too. Or maybe just naps. Hard to tell. This is Victorian high society's favourite pastime. Mediums like Celestina are not only spiritual guides, they're celebrities. People keep calling cards with their names. They get invited to country estates. Some even tour the continent, trailing mystery and perfume in their wake. Historians still argue whether these women, and a few men, actually believed in their powers, or were simply clever performers reading the room, literally and emotionally. Either way, their skill at creating atmosphere is undeniable. A few whispered names, a well-timed gust of cold air, and the whole room believes. One such star is Florence Cook, who supposedly channels a spirit named Katie King. During one session, Katie appears in flowing white robes while Florence is supposedly unconscious in a cabinet. They are suspiciously the same height. At one point, a guest tries to grab Katie and is punched in the face for his efforts. The spirit escapes through a window. How convenient. Another fan favourite is Daniel Douglas Home. That's Hume, but pronounced Hume because Victorians love being confusing. He performs for emperors, tsars, and even Napoleon III. His specialty? levitating out of windows. Yes, out of windows, more than once. Historians still argue whether he used wires, hypnotic suggestion, or pure stage magic. No one ever catches him faking it, which only adds to his legend. You think back to Madame Celestina, who is now speaking in the voice of a 10-year-old girl named Clarabelle. Clarabelle warns you that someone in the room is hiding a great sorrow, and also that the biscuits were baked a minute too long. The group gasps. Lady Merton Wright looks alarmed. Her cook is fired the next morning. It's not just the showmanship, it's the meaning. These séances give people the illusion of control over death. They create a safe space for grief, a performance art of mourning. Instead of silent weeping, you get dramatic closure. A conversation. A performance with emotional catharsis and optional refreshments. And while many of these mediums fall from grace, caught with hidden trumpets or ectoplasm made of egg whites and gauze, some escape scandal entirely. It turns out if your fans want to believe badly enough, nothing can disprove you. You leave that séance dazed. Was Uncle Patrick real? Was Clarabelle a ghost or a falsetto? The tambourine? A ghost with rhythm or a string pulled by a nervous apprentice? You'll never know, and that's kind of the point. You wake the next morning with a peculiar taste in your mouth. Not spiritual dread, though that's there too, but something more physical, waxy, salty, slightly like laundry starch. Like, you sit up and realise to your horror that it's ectoplasm residue, or maybe it's just cheesecloth. Welcome to the damp and disturbingly tactile world of Victorian ectoplasm, that bizarre, ghostly substance that supposedly pours out of mediums during peak spiritual performance like mystical mucus from the afterlife. You're back in yet another séance room. Yes, you have a problem. This one's in Brighton, and the hostess insists she has the most reliable medium in the region. You sip your tea, side-eyeing the velvet curtains for movement, and whisper to yourself, please let this be the one without goo. Spoiler, it's not. The room darkens. The medium groans softly. Her hands tremble, her eyes flutter, and then, there it is. A pale substance begins to emerge from her mouth, as if she's painfully coughing up an old nightgown. The guests gasp. Someone behind you faints dramatically and hits the carpet like a collapsing marionette. Meanwhile, the medium pulls foot after foot of gauzy white material from her own throat. Ectoplasm. Or, if you prefer your ghost stories with a little realism, cheesecloth soaked in egg whites and camphor, cleverly hidden and regurgitated on cue. You try not to retch, but at the time, people believed. The term ectoplasm wasn't coined until later, thanks to a French physiologist in the early 1900s, but Victorians already embraced the concept. Mediums described it as a vital substance, part spirit, part human essence, used by ghosts to manifest physically in the world. Sometimes it oozed from the nose, sometimes from the ears, usually the mouth, for maximum theatrical impact. One particularly committed medium was even said to produce it from her navel, though skeptics insist she just had good core control and a lot of gauze. Historians still argue whether some mediums believed in the ectoplasm themselves, or simply saw it as necessary stagecraft, a way to give the audience what they came for. After all, if people expected ghostly emissions, who were they to disappoint? And once the trend took off, it became a competition. Who could produce more? Whose ectoplasm looked the most convincingly gross? Some mediums used animal intestines, others experimented with phosphorescent paint, which, incidentally, is a great way to summon spirits and contract lead poisoning. You witness one medium who claims her ectoplasm contains faces, human ones. They materialize briefly in the gauze, whisper secrets, then vanish. Later, someone finds newspaper portraits cut out and glued to the fabric. It's art, sort of. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Prominent scientists began to attend séances under the pretense of inquiry. One insisted on examining ectoplasm under a microscope, discovering it was mostly kitchen rags and aspiration. Another brought in ultraviolet light, which promptly exposed every hidden trick and sent the medium running for the hallway. But the real turning point came when cameras entered the séance room. Spirit photography was already a thing, more on that later, but now photographers started documenting ectoplasm in action. The photos are startling. Fuzzy, white blobs emerging from noses, ears, and other less mentionable places. They looked less like spirit matter and more like someone losing a fight with a laundry basket. Still, they captivated the public. You flip through one such photo album, handed to you by a gentleman with thick spectacles and very thin patience. He explains that his wife is very spiritually sensitive, which is why they've had to buy 6 new carpets this month, each one ruined by ectoplasmic residue. The most unsettling part? Some séance goers reported smelling the ectoplasm. Descriptions vary wildly. Some say violets, others say vinegar. A few describe it as uncooked meat that's been read poetry. No matter the truth, the drama was real. Ectoplasm became a kind of spiritual theatre prop, a ticketed experience, a wet, twitchy spectacle in parlors across the empire. And for some, it worked. It made the invisible visible. Grief became tangible. The dead weren't gone. They were just slightly sticky. And even when mediums were caught, when cheesecloth was found under corsets or behind curtains, people kept showing up. There's a special kind of magic in willful disbelief. You see what you want to see, hear what you need to hear. One man, after watching a medium get exposed mid-ectoplasm stream, simply said, "Yes, but the spirit had already entered her. The fabric was just for our benefit." That's Victorian spiritualism in a nutshell, hoax or holy. It all depends on your angle. By the end of the evening, you're politely declining second helpings of gooseberry tart. You can't eat while remembering that last séance where ectoplasm was wrung out into a silver bowl. You start carrying your own linen napkin, just in case. You're beginning to wonder if Victorian ghost hunters just had a fabric fixation. So far, you've seen tall ghosts, cheesecloth spirits, and ectoplasmic scarves that could double as cravats. So tonight, you're hoping for something different. Less damp, maybe a little more visual. You're not disappointed. You've been invited to a portrait sitting, but not the usual sort where you sit stiffly for 3 hours while trying not to blink. No, this one is special. The photographer promises that when the glass plate is developed, you'll see not just yourself, but your dearly departed smiling faintly over your shoulder. Welcome to the world of spirit photography. You sit on a stool in a dim studio surrounded by dusty drapes, fake columns, and the slightly oppressive scent of lavender oil. The photographer, a pale man named Mr. Willoughby, with a receding hairline and a growing sense of self-importance, adjusts your collar, fiddles with the lens cap and whispers reverently, "Now relax and think of someone you've lost." You do, and you hold very, very still. The click of the shutter is followed by a long silence, and then the slow, alchemical magic of development in the darkroom. The image appears, your face, serious and sepia-toned, and just behind you, a misty shape, a face, half there, faint, familiar. Your heart stutters. Is it real? Was that truly Aunt Eliza? The one who insisted on lemon in her tea and knitted you itchy socks every winter? Well, the truth is, probably not. Spirit photography was born in the 1860s, just in time to ride the wave of mass mourning from the American Civil War and Victorian England's own perpetual funeral aesthetic. The most famous practitioner was William H. Mumler, a Boston engraver-turned-photographer who discovered ghosts appearing in his portraits, according to him at least. One of his earliest clients saw a spirit hovering behind her in a print. She wept. He printed more. Soon, his studio was booked solid, each client desperate to catch a final glimpse of someone they loved. Of course, skeptics weren't far behind. Historians still argue whether Mumler ever believed in his ghostly results or simply saw a market opportunity. Modern analysis shows he likely used double exposure, a clever trick involving pre-exposed plates or faint residual images on glass. But here's the thing. Even when he was taken to court in 1869, accused of fraud, the jury couldn't prove he'd doctored the images. His acquittal only added to his mystique. You look closer at your portrait. That faint face behind you. Is it actually Aunt Eliza? Or is it one of Mumler's collection of spirit stand-ins? Actors or stock photos he recycled for effect? Hard to say. But Victorians didn't just accept spirit photography, they adored it. Suddenly everyone wanted one. Mediums collaborated with photographers, entire books were published compiling ghost-filled portraits. One photo shows a grieving mother with a ghost child clinging to her skirts. Another has a man staring solemnly forward, a hand, thin and translucent, resting on his shoulder. Spooky, artistic, intimate. Not all images were subtle. Some ghosts looked suspiciously like out-of-work actors draped in chiffon. Others had curious similarities, identical faces, identical poses, identical folds in the ectoplasm. Strange how so many spirits had the same tailor. One of the most famous believers was none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, our favourite Victorian contradiction. Sherlock Holmes's creator may have written the world's most logical detective, but in real life, he was all in on spirit photography. Doyle believed the images were proof of life after death. He wrote essays, attended photo sessions, and argued passionately with skeptics, often with the kind of intensity that makes you suspect he hadn't fully recovered from something personal. He hadn't. He lost his son in World War I. Grief does strange things. You imagine Doyle standing in a photography studio, adjusting his moustache while a ghostly blur hovered over his shoulder. He probably beamed with pride. You probably would too. Meanwhile, trick photographers popped up like mushrooms after rain. They advertised in spiritualist journals, sold prints at séance circles, and occasionally disappeared when exposed, vanishing into the mist like the spirits they peddled. Some photos were laughably bad. One showed a ghost holding a newspaper dated the same week as the photo. Another had two spirits, with the same face. Twins, or someone copy-pasted before it was trendy. Still, even the obvious fakes had an emotional pull. People wanted to see something, to believe their loved ones lingered, watching protectively. Even skeptics sometimes folded. One journalist famously wrote, "I know it is a trick. I saw the wires, but for a moment I felt my mother was there. I wept." And maybe that's the core of it. Spirit photography wasn't just about evidence, it was about longing, about giving grief a face, a form, a faded silhouette at the edge of the frame. You tuck your photo away, you know the ghost isn't real. But still, you can't help peeking at it one more time before you leave the studio. Maybe, just maybe, that's her. You're starting to think Victorian England has become a sort of supernatural theme park. And just when you think the attractions couldn't get more absurd, along comes a man in a stiff collar and dreamy eyes, holding a copy of the Strand magazine in one hand and a photograph of a fairy in the other. This man is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and tonight you're seated across from him at a modest little séance in Southsea. You're here for ghost talk, of course, but Doyle, he's here for proof. Fairies, phantoms, ectoplasm, astral projection, the whole sparkly package. You try to hide your skepticism, but it's tough. This is the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, the sharpest mind in fiction, a man who once declared that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. But in real life, Doyle seems to have eliminated skepticism altogether, and tonight he's talking earnestly about the Cottingley fairies. Let's rewind. It's 1917, and two Yorkshire girls, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, claim to have photographed actual fairies in their garden. The photos are charming. Little winged figures cavorting beside a brook, their wings delicate, their poses cheerful. They look like something from a children's book, mostly because they were. Spoiler alert, the fairies were paper cutouts held up with hat pins. But Doyle? He's all in. He publishes the images in the Strand, argues passionately in their favour, and insists that the skeptics are simply too closed-minded to recognise the truth. He calls it evidence of a spiritual revolution. Most readers call it adorable nonsense. Historians still argue whether Doyle was fooled or willfully believing, whether he needed to believe in something so badly after the death of his son and brother that he embraced anything vaguely hopeful. Some say he was tricked, others say he tricked himself. But he's not just a fairy fan. Doyle becomes one of the most vocal spiritualists of his time. He attends séances religiously, debates critics on the radio, and writes book after book on spiritual encounters. He calls skeptics materialist bigots and insists the spirit world is not only real, it's active, organised, and possibly taking notes. You sip your tea cautiously as Doyle launches into a story about a spirit council governing interdimensional affairs. Someone behind you coughs in Morse code, possibly a ghost, possibly just a butler with bronchitis. What's especially strange is the contrast. Doyle isn't a hack. He's a trained doctor, a successful writer, a man of science, at least on paper. And yet, here he is defending mediums who vomit cheesecloth and fairies cut from greeting cards. You ask yourself, is this what happens when grief collides with imagination? Doyle believed spiritualism could save the world, that it could heal the trauma of World War I, that it could explain the unexplainable. He travelled the world lecturing about it, enduring ridicule, mockery and very awkward dinner parties. At one séance, he reportedly stood up mid-spirit message to declare, "We are in the presence of the next great truth." The hostess fainted. The ghost may have rolled its eyes. You find yourself oddly charmed. He's sincere, maybe too sincere, but in a time when so many are faking belief for fame or profit, Doyle really means it. One of his most passionate beliefs is in spirit communication through typewriters and Ouija boards. He's convinced that messages can be dictated from the great beyond and transcribed word for word. At one point, he even attempts to contact Houdini after the magician's death, but we'll get to that drama soon. For now, you're listening to Doyle read a poem supposedly written by a ghost named Eliza from 1742. It's not very good, but he's so proud of it you clap anyway. The others do too. The séance ends with a floating flower and a great deal of heartfelt sighing. Later, as you step out into the night air, Doyle pats your shoulder. "The truth is out there," he says warmly, "and it doesn't need to hide forever." You nod, unsure whether he means ghosts, fairies, or just the fact that someone left the séance with a spoon tucked in their coat. Either way, tonight you realise something critical. The Victorian obsession with the occult isn't just about spectacle or grief. Sometimes it's about hope. Even misguided, glitter-covered, aggressively enthusiastic hope. And in a world recovering from war, disease and industrial collapse, maybe belief in something invisible and kind, even if it wears tulle wings, isn't the worst coping mechanism. Still, you're keeping one eyebrow permanently raised, just in case. You've barely stepped out of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's wide-eyed fairy reverie before another, much sharper presence slices into the spiritualist fog. Harry Houdini. Yes, that Houdini, world-famous escape artist, master of locks, lover of chains, in the least scandalous way, and the spiritualist's worst nightmare. Tonight you find yourself in a crowded theatre, stage lit with that peculiar gas lamp glow, waiting to watch a man in tights and handcuffs do something astonishing. But what you're really here for isn't just magic, it's revenge. Because unlike Doyle, Houdini wasn't here to make friends with ghosts. He was here to debunk them, to tear down every trembling curtain, yank off every veil, and shout from the rooftops, "They're all fakes, and I can prove it." It's 1920-something. The world is still reeling from the war. People are desperate for comfort. Spiritualism is booming like never before, and Houdini, the great showman, starts attending séances, first out of curiosity, then out of grim determination. He's polite at first, respectful, open-minded, but séance after séance the same thing happens. Ropes untie themselves. Ghost voices sound suspiciously like ventriloquism, and mysterious gusts of wind align a little too neatly with hidden foot pumps. Houdini, being Houdini, knows the tricks. He sees the wires, the trapdoors, the fake ectoplasm made from chewed paper and petroleum jelly. In one particularly awkward séance, he grabs the medium mid-trance and reveals a telescoping rod under her dress, used to levitate a trumpet. You think, the ghost is not going to recover from that one. Historians still argue about his motives. Was he bitter after failing to contact his own mother, whom he adored beyond reason? Or did he see spiritualists as dangerous predators, exploiting the grief of vulnerable people? Maybe both. Either way, he turns it into a crusade. He starts giving lectures called things like Frauds Who Prey Upon the Bereaved. He writes scathing books, including A Magician Among the Spirits, which is basically a burn book for mediums. He even testifies before Congress, demanding laws to protect the public from spiritualist swindlers. And yes, this causes an enormous rift between him and Arthur Conan Doyle. The two had been friends, they'd vacationed together, shared letters, traded ideas. Doyle even believed Houdini was a powerful psychic who just didn't know it yet. Houdini, meanwhile, kept begging Doyle to please stop talking about fairies in public. Eventually, their friendship shattered under the pressure of too many séance arguments. Doyle's wife once tried to channel Houdini's mother and passed along a message in perfect English. Houdini, who knew his Hungarian-born mother never spoke English, was livid. That was the last straw. You picture it now. The polite tea visit, Doyle's wife scribbling furiously on hotel stationery while possessed. Houdini nodding grimly and later telling reporters, "That woman never met my mother, not even ghost mother." He didn't just debunk mediums from afar, he went into their lairs. He attended séances undercover, often disguised with fake beards and fake names. He brought hidden recording devices. He rigged his own chairs and tables, and when the medium inevitably summoned a spirit, he stood up, threw off his disguise and dramatically revealed the trick. You'd think people would be grateful. They weren't. Many séance goers actually hissed at Houdini, furious that he'd spoiled the illusion. Some accused him of being possessed himself. One medium tried to curse him with a dead squirrel and a sachet of rose thorns. It didn't work, but it definitely made for an awkward train ride. And yet, Houdini couldn't stop. His performances began including full exposés. He'd recreate séance tricks on stage, explaining every illusion. He'd demonstrate how to materialize a ghost using nothing but cheesecloth, a coat rack, and poor lighting. He once had an assistant dress up as a spirit, float across the stage using wires, and then remove her costume while the audience gasped. Not a spirit, he said with flair, just moored from wardrobe. And yes, it was funny. But it was also tragic, because behind the snark you could see the pain. He'd wanted so badly to believe. He just couldn't lie to himself. Even as he exposed the frauds, he kept attending séances in secret, just in case, just once. Maybe one would be real. Just one. He never found it. In his final years, he offered a public challenge. If any medium could produce a real supernatural event under scientific conditions, he'd give them $10,000, a fortune at the time. No one ever claimed it. When he died in 1926, he left a secret code with his wife, to be used in the event that he could reach her from beyond the grave. She held séances every Halloween for 10 years. Nothing came through. Finally, she blew out the candle and said, "Houdini did not come back." And that was that. You step out of the theatre, your coat dusted with sawdust and skepticism. The night air is crisp. Somewhere, a newspaper boy yells about a new war, or a political scandal, or a photo of a ghost dog riding a bicycle. But you're just thinking about Harry, the man who escaped everything except hope. You're starting to suspect the Victorians had a secret rule. If your evening doesn't involve at least one ghost, 2 scandalous rumours, and a velvet robe, you're simply not doing it right. So tonight you find yourself in a very different setting. Not a theatre or a drawing room, but a lodge. The air is heavy with incense. Everyone's wearing robes, there are candles everywhere, and someone just asked if you brought your wand. No, you haven't accidentally joined a Hogwarts LARP. You've stumbled into the birth of Victorian occult societies, a world even more tangled than a spirit trumpet in a séance curtain. Right now, you're sitting in the temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, probably the most famous magical society of the age. Founded in 1888, it brought together poets, painters, and plenty of people who'd read one too many alchemical treatises. Their goal? To unlock the secrets of the universe, also to wear excellent capes. The Golden Dawn wasn't the first secret society. Freemasons had been doing mysterious handshakes and whispering Latin for centuries, but this new breed of occultist took things further, blending Kabbalah, astrology, Rosicrucianism, and Egyptian mythology into one heady spiritual cocktail. You sit through an initiation ritual, which feels like a cross between a high school drama rehearsal and an exotic-themed dinner party. There's chanting, someone throws salt, a wand is waved. The new member is blindfolded, spun in a circle, then told they are now on the path of light. Everyone claps politely. It sounds silly, but don't laugh too loudly. Many of the members are the creative elite of the era. W.B. Yeats, yes, that Yeats, was a devoted member. He attended regularly, composed magical poems, and argued passionately about elemental spirits. Arthur Machen, Bram Stoker, Aleister Crowley. They all dabbled, sometimes deeply. Crowley, in particular, is, well, let's just say he's the guy your lodge warns you about. He joined the Golden Dawn in 1898 and quickly earned a reputation for being brilliant, arrogant, and deeply fond of ceremonial daggers. He clashed with nearly everyone. When the London chapter refused to promote him, he broke into the headquarters in full regalia and performed his own ritual takeover. Historians still argue whether this was a magical rebellion or just exceptionally petty cosplay. Crowley eventually left, or was kicked out depending on who you ask, and went on to found his own movement, Thelema, based around the phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." He styled himself as the Great Beast 666. Victorian mothers everywhere shuddered into their embroidery hoops. Still, occult societies like the Golden Dawn weren't just about drama and mysticism. They offered structure, hierarchy, and purpose. In an age of industrial alienation and spiritual hunger, that meant something. Members weren't just lost souls, they were initiates, seekers on a sacred path. And unlike most religious institutions at the time, these societies allowed women to join, and even lead. That was revolutionary. Women could be high priestesses, symbolic guardians of the astral plane, or at least the ones who made sure the candles were arranged symmetrically. The rituals themselves were elaborate. Coloured robes indicated your rank. Tools included wands, daggers, cups, and pentacles, each representing different elements and forces. There were chants, invocations, hours of meditative focus. If you ever wanted to summon the Archangel Michael and feel like a stage magician doing Shakespeare, this was your scene. You watch one ritual that involves tracing symbols in the air with a sword while invoking divine names in Hebrew. It's impressive. Also a bit sweaty. One man faints halfway through a fire invocation and has to be revived with peppermint water and stern disapproval. But the sense of community is real. For all the mystical theatrics, members talk about transformation, healing, becoming their true selves. And yes, they gossip relentlessly about other lodges. One infamous feud involves a splinter group calling themselves the Alpha et Omega, who claim to have received secret instructions from Egyptian deities via dreampost. They duel the Golden Dawn not with swords but with pamphlets. Victorian shade, printed and distributed. Eventually, as with all great cult-like groups, things fall apart. Power struggles, leadership disputes, magical rivalries, it's the usual recipe. By the early 1900s, many of these orders have splintered or fizzled, but their ideas linger. You see their influence in everything from 20th century witchcraft to pop culture. Tarot cards, reinvented by Golden Dawn members. The idea of energy centers in the body, filtered through their rituals. Your friend who collects crystals and does moon journaling probably owes them a thank you card. As you leave the lodge tonight, your head swimming with celestial diagrams and incense smoke, you realize something. These people weren't faking it. They meant it. They were trying, in their own elaborate way, to wrest meaning from a chaotic world. And sometimes you think as you stumble over a ceremonial goblet, you have to respect the effort. You've been initiated, chanted at, ghost-grabbed, and smacked with ectoplasm. So when someone offers you a gentler occult experience this evening, you say yes without even asking questions. That's how you end up at a bustling Victorian fair, seated between a phrenologist and a palm reader, while someone in a top hat assures you he can diagnose your soul by squeezing your skull. Welcome to the whimsical and wildly profitable world of phrenology, palmistry, and profitable nonsense. You're not in a smoky lodge or a hushed séance circle anymore. This is marketplace spiritualism. Brightly coloured stalls, bells ringing, chalk signs boasting "Know your fate" and "Reveal your hidden talents for threepence." You're handed a brochure that misspells the word forehead, but insists it holds the key to your destiny. Let's start with phrenology, the pseudoscience of reading skull bumps to determine personality, intelligence, and possibly your favourite kind of soup. Developed in the early 19th century by Franz Joseph Gall, yes, another Franz, what is it with these guys? Phrenology claimed the brain had specific regions responsible for different traits, like benevolence, combativeness, or love of children. These traits supposedly caused lumps or indentations in the skull that trained professionals could read like a map. So you sit down, and a man in a frock coat gently runs his fingers over your head, murmuring things like, "You're quite courageous, strong in maternal instincts, and surprisingly suspicious of authority." You nod. It all feels eerily accurate. But then he adds, "also prone to excessive pudding consumption," and you wonder if he's just judging your waistcoat buttons. Phrenology wasn't just a fairground gag, though. It was everywhere. Employers used it to evaluate job candidates. Parents used it to guide child rearing. Some suitors even insisted on head reports before proposing marriage. Historians still argue whether phrenology's popularity was more about self-discovery or simply Victorian obsession with categorizing everything. Either way, it made an absolute fortune. And then there's palmistry. Unlike skull groping, palm reading is older than your average pyramid. But the Victorians gave it their own flourish, complete with illustrated guides and Latin terminology. You sit across from a woman with elaborate rings and a stare that could cut glass. She takes your hand, traces the creases with one long nail, and declares that your line of fate intersects your Mount of Venus, which apparently means a complicated love life and excellent taste in biscuits. She explains that the heartline reveals emotion, the headline shows intellect, and the lifeline tells, well, you can guess. There's even a line for fame, which suspiciously appears on almost every palm she reads tonight. Convenient. But again, this wasn't just parlour fun. Palmistry manuals sold like hotcakes. Street readers made steady coin. Newspapers ran weekly palm signs of the stars, which you can think of as early tabloid horoscopes with extra fingers. You peer around at the other stalls, there's someone reading tea leaves and gasping theatrically. Another offers aura sketches for a small fee and a lot of coloured chalk. One woman is selling magnetised water that promises to cure gout, melancholy, and vague spiritual listlessness. You take a sip. It tastes like normal water that sat near a copper pipe too long. It's easy to laugh. But Victorians weren't always laughing. Beneath the whimsy is something deeper. Anxiety. This is a time of rapid change, industrialisation, urban sprawl, scientific discoveries that make the world feel bigger and colder. People longed for a sense of self, a feeling that their lives mattered, and if someone could hand them that meaning for the price of a pint, well, why not? There's also the darker side. Phrenology, for all its carnival charm, was weaponized to justify racism, sexism, and classism. Scientific skull charts were used to declare some groups inferior and others destined to rule. Palmistry was co-opted by eugenicists. Even astrology was spun to serve imperial fantasies. Your star sign might explain why you were meant to govern tropical colonies. The line between spiritual exploration and pseudo-scientific oppression, very, very thin. Still, for many Victorians, especially women and the working class, these practices offered rare autonomy, a chance to ask questions, to feel seen, even if the answers were vague or invented or delivered by someone holding a slightly leaky crystal orb. You linger at the fair well into the evening, your head a little sore from being poked, your palms slightly wrinkled from overreading. You pass a stall where someone's offering magnetic animal readings. You decide that's your limit for the night. As you walk home under flickering street lamps, your brain full of destiny lines and skull zones, you can't help but wonder if some part of it all could be true. That maybe your jawline does say something about your soul. That maybe your future is hiding in your lifeline. Or maybe you're just really good at hearing what you want to hear. You're not sure what time it is anymore, whether it's night or morning, or just one long Victorian fever dream of incense, table rapping, and well-dressed ghosts. You've seen mediums, mystics, mesmerists, and one man who claimed to be Queen Cleopatra's reincarnated uncle. But tonight, you notice something different. The room you've just entered is full of women, not just weeping widows or nervous séance attendees, but leading the event. At the head of the parlour, a tall woman in a plum-coloured gown lifts her hands, silences the room, and announces calmly, "The spirits are ready. Are you?" You are? Maybe. This is the hidden engine behind the Victorian spiritualist movement. Women finding power through spirits. In a society where women couldn't vote, own property in many cases, or pursue serious academic careers, spiritualism offered an astonishing loophole. The moment a woman claimed she was speaking for the dead, she could speak freely. In fact, she had to. No one interrupts a ghost. Mediumship became one of the few socially acceptable public roles for women outside the church or the stage, and some women became superstars. Take Emma Harding Britten, for instance. Tonight, she's the one in the plum gown. She started out on the musical stage but became one of the era's most powerful spiritualist speakers. She gave trance lectures, published spiritualist texts, and even helped lay the groundwork for what would become the National Spiritualist Association. She wasn't just channeling spirits, she was preaching, and with fire. Crowds came not just for the ghostly messages, but for her unflinching views on abolition, women's rights, and the afterlife as the ultimate democracy. Another name in the Spiritual Hall of Fame, Cora L.V. Scott. She began channeling spirits as a teenager and went on to speak before massive crowds, including political conventions where she delivered improvised speeches while possessed by historical figures. Imagine a 19-year-old girl channeling Plato in front of 200 men with top hats and mutton chops. The courage, the chaos. Historians still argue whether these women used spirits as a rhetorical device or genuinely believed they were channels. Either way, the result was radical. Spiritualism created a space where women were listened to, had to be listened to, and in doing so, it cracked the glass ceiling with ghostly fingers. In this room, the atmosphere is electric. The women sit with spines straight, their voices clear and commanding. One channels a soldier from the Crimean War speaking of courage and unnecessary suffering. Another speaks in a trance, eyes half closed, offering comfort to a woman who's just lost a child. And it's not just the message, it's the presence. These women are in control of the room, of the energy, of the belief system itself. You begin to notice patterns. Mediums often work in pairs. A sensitive, who enters the trance, and a controller, who manages the session, takes notes, and guides the conversation. And more often than not, both roles are filled by women. This isn't just séance work, it's management, performance, counselling, advocacy. Spiritualism gave women something that Victorian society usually denied them: authority. You catch whispers of how these same women used séances to quietly question social norms. Some channeled spirits that condemned slavery. Others delivered impromptu sermons about the dignity of women's work, the need for public education, and even the injustice of poverty. Spirits were apparently very politically progressive. It also wasn't entirely coincidence that spiritualism overlapped heavily with the early suffrage movement. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, many early feminists had at least dabbled in spiritualist circles, if not actively participated. Why? Because both movements believed in invisible forces, one political, one metaphysical, shaping the world, waiting to be acknowledged. Still, there was risk. Not everyone approved. Religious authorities condemned female mediums as heretics, deluded at best, demonic at worst. Medical professionals often called them hysterics, conveniently forgetting that hysteria was just Victorian for women with opinions. And yet they kept going. Some published their trance lectures as books, others went on national speaking tours, a few ended up founding their own spiritualist newspapers. One built an entire commune based on messages from the spirits, including detailed floor plans dictated by a ghost architect named Peter the Wise. You don't question it, you've seen worse. You're handed a pamphlet at the end of the evening. It's titled The Feminine Spirit, A Beacon in the Darkness. It includes prayers, instructions for home séances, and an essay on ethereal leadership. You tuck it into your coat pocket. Might make for some excellent light reading if you ever get back to the 21st century. As the guests begin to leave, you realise something else. While many of the men you've seen in this world of ghost-seeking are theatrical, performative, even egotistical, the women are often practical, focused. They may believe in spirits, yes, but they also believe in the power of being heard. You leave the house with the memory of a young woman's voice, shaking but steady, delivering a message from a spirit named Eliza who regrets never saying "I love you." The recipient burst into tears. The room exhaled. Maybe the dead speak. Or maybe it was just a girl finding the words she was never allowed to say aloud. Either way, the message was received. You've seen the séances, the ectoplasm, the floating tambourines, the impassioned speeches from ghost-possessed teenage girls. You've seen phrenology booths and palm readers, magnetic water, and Arthur Conan Doyle making excuses for fairies. So naturally you assume the weirdness must be confined to shadowy drawing rooms and candlelit back streets. Nope. Tonight, you're checking in at a stately old hotel by the seaside. Brass railings, faded velvet carpets, an elevator that wheezes like it's inhaling ghosts, and as the bellhop guides you to your room, he says, very casually, "Mind the third-floor corridor, it's active after midnight. Welcome to ghost tourism and haunted hotels where death sells rooms and paranormal activity is just part of the amenities list. You're staying in a place advertised in the Occult Gazette as having 17 confirmed spectres and one mischievous poltergeist with a fondness for spoons. And honestly, you're impressed. That's more ghosts than guest towels." This trend took off fast in the late 19th century. As spiritualism gained steam, so did the commercial opportunities it offered, especially for the travel industry. Hotels, manors, even entire towns started advertising their ghostly residents like they were rare birds. People travelled miles to sit in the room where someone allegedly died of heartbreak, or to hear footsteps pacing above their heads when no one else was checked in. You walk the corridors now, half expecting cold spots and whispered names. Instead, you get a draft from a badly sealed window and a guest across the hall muttering about phantom toast. Still, the ambience works, the hallways creak just right. The portraits on the walls have that suspicious eye-following effect. There's even a guest book in the lobby filled with notes like, "Felt an icy hand brush my ankle at 2:17 a.m. Room 6 smells like pipe smoke and shame. I saw my ex-husband's ghost. I am not divorced. Please advise." It's part travel, part theatre, part belief, and it's booming. One of the earliest famous destinations was Bram's Hill House, an English manor with a ghostly white lady said to wander its halls looking for her lost lover. Guests lined up for the chance to glimpse her. She never showed up. Probably ghost union hours, but that didn't stop the place from getting fully booked for months. Then there's the ancient Ram Inn, which by 1890 had already acquired a reputation for dark rituals and ghostly screams. Guests would dare each other to spend the night. Those who made it to morning often reported being pressed upon by an unseen force, or hearing hoofbeats on the stairs, sometimes both, occasionally followed by requests for refunds. Historians still argue whether these stories were ever believed, or if they were clever marketing tactics by innkeepers with a flair for the dramatic. Either way, it worked. Ghost tourism became a fully fledged Victorian industry. Even non-haunted locations got in on the act. A bathhouse in Brighton claimed its steam room was haunted by a Roman centurion. A Welsh tea shop insisted the teapots sometimes rearranged themselves in tribute to a long-dead pastry chef named Edna. In Scotland, a hotel proudly advertised the fact that no guest has slept uninterrupted since 1875. But perhaps the most charming detail of all, the rise of ghost souvenir culture. You could purchase spirit portraits of yourself with a ghost edited in. There were tiny jars of haunted air for sale. Children bought wind-up ghost toys that howled softly when wounded. One enterprising hotel even offered phantom detection kits, including a candle, a small bell, and a feather for testing breezes. You wander downstairs to the hotel bar, which, of course, is decorated with cobwebs and antique clocks. The bartender informs you that the mirror behind the bar sometimes fogs up with names. You ask who writes them. He just shrugs and pours your brandy. It's not just fun. For many Victorians, these ghostly journeys served a deeper purpose. They were like pilgrimages, little spiritual adventures that combined leisure, wonder, and emotional catharsis. You overhear a guest at the next table telling her friend, "I feel closer to him here, like he might walk through that door." She's staring at the entrance with more hope than fear. You understand. A haunted hotel isn't just about fear, it's about presence. The idea that the past hasn't fully left, that it lingers, brushing shoulders with the living, whispering in stairwells, borrowing your toothpaste. And some hotels took it even further. In Manchester, a famous inn began offering séance suites, rooms designed specifically for contacting the dead, with built-in candle niches, spirit trumpets, and fainting couches. You wonder what their cleaning staff thought of that. As the night winds down, you walk the hall one last time. The gaslights flicker gently. You hear something, soft footsteps behind you. Maybe just the building settling, maybe just your imagination, or maybe not. You turn, nothing. Just a long corridor, 1,000 whispered stories, and the faint scent of lavender left behind by a guest who might have checked out a century ago. By now, you've learned that in Victorian England, everything can be haunted. Tables, cameras, bathhouses, hats. But tonight, you're headed to a place where the supernatural isn't just accepted, it's choreographed, a Victorian funeral. You arrive at the appointed house, greeted not by a smile, but by the heavy toll of a mourning bell. The curtains are drawn, the mirrors are covered in black crepe, and even the dog is wearing a black ribbon. You've stepped into the opulent, meticulous world of Victorian funerals gone deluxe. Death, in this era, is not a quiet affair. It's a production, a statement, a competitive sport. The Victorians didn't just grieve, they curated it. A death in the household sets off a cascade of rituals. First, the clocks are stopped at the time of death, symbolic, theatrical, and slightly unnerving. Then, the body is washed, dressed, and laid out in the best parlour, not hidden away but displayed, often for days. You stand in one such room now, the air thick with lilac and camphor, and try not to stare at the lace bonnet on the deceased, who appears to be judging you. And outside, the spectacle continues. The hearse arrives. Not a simple cart, but an elaborate glass coach, drawn by black horses draped in velvet and crowned with ostrich plumes that tremble in the wind like ghost feathers. Professional mourners wail dramatically. Children are dressed in tiny black suits. Even the postman pauses to doff his cap. You blink. Is this a funeral or a royal procession? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. Victorian mourning wasn't just emotional, it was social. Entire industries existed solely to support grief. Mourning dress shops stocked shelves with black bombazine, jet jewellery, and instruction booklets titled things like How to Behave at a Burial. Mourning etiquette was so strict that a woman who wore lavender too soon after a death could be socially exiled. And the timeline, grueling. A widow was expected to remain in full mourning. Black clothes, no social visits, minimal joy, for up to 2 years. No colour, no flirting, no lace with too much spirit. Historians still argue whether this was about genuine reverence or performative piety. Probably both. Queen Victoria herself set the gold standard, and possibly the gloom standard, by mourning Prince Albert for 4 decades. She wore black until her own death, kept his shaving brush ready every morning, and even ordered his hot water delivered daily. You wonder how many servants just quietly stopped following that part after year 25. Inside the funeral parlour you see another fascinating artefact, mourning jewellery. This isn't just black ribbon or a tasteful brooch. This is jewellery made from hair, specifically the hair of the deceased, woven into intricate patterns and sealed under glass or braided into lockets. Someone next to you whispers, "That one's her husband's hair, and that one's her son's." You nod politely and realise your own necklace feels very boring now. Photos are also a part of the mourning ritual. Yes, post-mortem photography. You see a photographer setting up in the corner, adjusting a lens the size of a dinner plate. It's a slow process, and oddly formal. The deceased is positioned carefully, seated upright, eyes closed, sometimes even painted open for the photo. A family member might pose beside them, looking grim and composed, the grief barely peeking through their Victorian reserve. You glance at one such photograph. It's a woman in black cradling her daughter. Except the daughter isn't breathing. It's disturbing and deeply tender. These images weren't morbid to Victorians, they were memories, proof that someone had lived and been loved. For many, it was the only photograph ever taken. Outside, the burial is just as scripted. Pallbearers walk at a measured pace. The coffin is lowered as a violin plays something haunting. A small boy throws in a white rose, possibly coached by his governess for maximum dramatic impact. And even after the burial, the performance continues. You're invited back to the house for a morning tea. It's not cheerful, but it is strangely comforting. Cucumber sandwiches, sponge cake, weak tea served in black-trimmed cups. The conversation stays solemn. The mood is somewhere between reverent and competitive. "She had 12 carriages at her husband's funeral," someone whispers. 12? I hear Lady Everleigh only managed 6. You sip your tea. The deceased would have loved this. Not everyone could afford the full experience. Working-class families often went into debt to provide a proper funeral, fearing social shame. Mourning clubs, yes, those existed, helped poorer families pool funds for acceptable coffins, hats and floral arrangements. Even the afterlife had a price tag. But for those with money and ambition, death became an art form. There were funeral planners, obituary writers, grief etiquette coaches. One enterprising woman started a mail-order service for personalised mourning stationery. Black borders, tasteful doves, optional weeping willows. You can't help but admire the precision. The way grief became a shared ritual, a cultural performance that made something unbearable feel, if not manageable, at least beautifully arranged. As you leave the house, someone hands you a mourning card with gold embossed lettering and a tiny lock of the deceased's hair attached. You tuck it into your pocket. A part of you is moved. Another part wonders if they laminated the hair. The carriage rattles away from the graveyard. You watch the black-veiled mourners grow smaller in the distance. And you realise the Victorians didn't hide death. They invited it in, gave it tea and asked it to pose for a photograph. You're starting to think nothing in Victorian life escaped theatrical treatment. Birth, marriage, tea time, death, all with a side of drama. So naturally, when it came time to pit science against spiritualism, the Victorians did not hold back. They brought out the gas lamps, the journals, the brass instruments, and yes, still the trumpets. Tonight you're attending a gathering, not in a parlour but in a laboratory. That's right. The room smells of chalk, varnish and something sharp, like burned ozone. Men in waistcoats are adjusting instruments. Women in plain dresses stand quietly in the corner, trying not to breathe too loudly. The medium is already in the cabinet, and the chalkboard reads, Experimental Session. 47. Investigating Apparitions. Welcome to the world of Science Plays Along, sort of. It's easy to imagine Victorian science as a cold mechanical affair, microscopes, steam engines, telegram wires humming with precision. But the truth is, many of the era's finest minds flirted openly with spiritualism. Some dove in head first, others just poked at it with a long stick and a sceptical frown. Take Sir William Crookes, a respected chemist and physicist who discovered thallium and developed the Crookes tube. An important step toward X-rays. Impressive resume. And yet, he also spent years studying mediums. Crookes became fascinated by a young medium named Florence Cook, who supposedly manifested a spirit called Katie King. Crookes invited Florence to his lab. He took notes. He tried to rule out trickery, and still he believed. He wrote about Katie King as if she were an entirely separate person, a ghost made flesh, even as skeptics pointed out that Katie and Florence were never in the same room at the same time, and had extremely similar shoe sizes. Historians still argue whether Crookes was duped, dazzled, or just had a complicated emotional attachment. He wasn't alone. Other prominent scientists, including members of the Royal Society, attended séances, built spirit-measuring devices, and tried to quantify the soul. Instruments were made to detect temperature changes near ghosts. Electrometers were rigged up to detect spirit currents. At least one team tried to weigh people at the moment of death, hoping to measure the soul's exit. The soul, it turns out, weighs approximately nothing. But the point wasn't always belief, it was method. Spiritualism promised access to another dimension. Science wanted to understand how. Could spirits be electromagnetic? Could ectoplasm be biological? Could ghosts be captured on film or disturbed by a puff of air? You sit quietly in the back as tonight's experiment begins. The medium moans, the cabinet trembles. A faint phosphorescent glow flickers in the dark. Gasps all around. The scientists murmur, adjusting their instruments. Then, a hand reaches out from the cabinet, gloved, glowing, slightly wobbly. A man leaps forward with calipers. Another jots notes. Someone takes a photograph with a magnesium flash so bright it nearly blinds the room. When the smoke clears, the spirit is gone. The medium slumps forward, dazed, and the scientists begin to argue. Some say it was real, others insist it was clever illusion. One just wants to recalibrate the barometer. Science may not have proven ghosts, but it did document them. Libraries began collecting case studies of apparitions, poltergeists, haunted dreams. Spiritualism wormed its way into medical journals and psychological reports. The Society for Psychical Research, more on them soon, was born out of this scientific curiosity. And here's where it gets strange. The more science investigated spiritualism, the more blurred the boundaries became. Paranormal researchers started sounding more like mystics, and some mystics started sounding alarmingly like physicists. You hear talk of vibrations, frequencies, energetic residues, not totally unlike early radio theory, which was also just emerging. If radio waves could carry sound invisibly through the air, why not thoughts? Why not spirits? The medium regains consciousness. The room exhales. Someone claims they saw a face in the ectoplasm. Someone else claims it looked like Queen Elizabeth I. You're not convinced, but you do admire the enthusiasm. Later, you're shown a small metal box labelled Spirit Interference Detector. It has wires, a coil, and a switch that does absolutely nothing. But it feels scientific. That's the genius of it. Science gave spiritualism legitimacy, or at least the illusion of it. You think back to another séance you attended, where a scientist in full evening wear placed flour on the floor to catch ghostly footprints. The next morning, there were footprints, human, size 6, wearing heel boots. The mediums, obviously, but still, points for effort. Not all scientists were fooled, of course. Thomas Huxley famously declined an invitation to join a spiritualist group, saying, "I've seen far too many ghosts to believe in them. Ouch! But many others walked the line. They tested, they measured, and they wondered. You leave the lab a little dazed, not because of ghosts, but because the line between hard science and hopeful guessing has never looked thinner. You're beginning to see the Victorian mind more clearly now. Not a war between reason and mysticism, but a dance. A complicated, passionate, candlelit dance between two forces that claim to explain the invisible. One in the language of equations, the other in the language of ghosts. You're beginning to feel like you've been inducted into some secret order yourself. Except instead of learning arcane rituals, you've developed a highly specialized skill in side-eyeing ghost photographs and politely declining ectoplasm samples. Tonight, though, you're heading to an address whispered to you by a particularly intense woman at the morning tea. It's not a séance, not a lecture, not a haunted tea party. It's a Society for Psychical Research meeting, also known as the SPR. Yes, it sounds like a club for people who write apparitions, cases where someone claimed to see a loved one appear to them at the exact moment that person died, often miles away. Historians still argue whether this was proof of psychic connection, just eerie coincidence, or the result of memories retroactively edited by grief. But the SPR collected hundreds of these stories. They published them, debated them, annotated them to death, sometimes literally. You listen now as a woman stands and shares a case. Her brother, a sailor, appeared to her in the mirror one night, dripping wet, pale and silent, only for a telegram to arrive the next morning saying his ship had sunk. A man in the front row frowns, flips through a thick notebook and mumbles, statistically anomalous but not conclusively supernatural. Another hand goes up. This one's talking about automatic writing, when someone in a trance writes messages allegedly dictated by spirits. The researcher recounts an experiment where a woman wrote in Latin, despite claiming no education in the language. A quiet gasp moves through the room. Of course, someone whispers, she probably read Virgil in school and forgot. The woman next to you notes that down with a knowing smirk. This is what makes the SPR different. They want to believe, but they need to be sure. They also keep running into problems. One is fraud, not just the cheesecloth wrapped kind, but subtle stuff. Selective memory, quiet leading of séance participants, mediums who unconsciously help their own case, spirits who always happen to say exactly what someone wants to hear. The SPR calls it the will to believe, that powerful force that bends reality to fit what we need it to be. Another issue? Bias. Some investigators become so convinced they fudge the rules. Others are so skeptical, they refuse to consider any evidence. One famous member allegedly tore up a report because the ghost in question sounded too smug. And then there's telepathy. Yep. The SPR didn't just study ghosts, they dove into mind reading. They set up experiments where one person thought of an image and another in a separate room tried to draw it. Results were inconsistent but occasionally uncanny. A horse drawn in Brussels that perfectly matched a horse imagined in Brighton. A bell, a flame, a pine tree. Not always right, but just right enough to keep things confusing. One of the most influential members was Frederick W. H. Myers, a poet and classical scholar who believed strongly in the existence of a subliminal self, a deeper layer of consciousness that connected all minds, perhaps even to the dead. He helped coin the term telepathy and led some of the SPR's most ambitious research. He also allegedly received a message from a spirit telling him, "Good job." But not all SPR cases were cozy ghost stories. Some were terrifying. Poltergeists, objects moving without cause, walls that bled, or at least leaked suspiciously red dye. They didn't jump to conclusions, but they documented everything. You're shown one report now. It includes a full floor plan, a diary of phenomena, weather notes, moon phases, and a sketch of a teacup mid-hover. You're both impressed and worried someone's going to try to repeat the experiment on you. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about the SPR, they're still around. That's right. Over a century later, they're still investigating, still publishing, still gently disagreeing about whether a Victorian woman really saw her deceased husband in the hall or just had too much port. You leave the meeting not with certainty, but with a deep appreciation for the effort, the blend of logic and longing, the desire to know without being fooled. The spirits may not have shown up tonight, but skepticism, that ghost's very much alive. You've just left the scholarly fold of the Society for Psychical Research, feeling enlightened, skeptical, and maybe a little smug. That is, until someone grabs your sleeve and whispers, "There's a séance in Whitechapel tonight. A real one. No fluff." You pause. You've heard that line before. Still, curiosity wins, so you're back in the parlour, again. The chairs are mismatched, the wallpaper peels like it's trying to escape the room, and the medium is already humming through her nose. But this one feels different, tenser, more fragile. You sense the crowd has history, and you're right. Tonight's gathering is tainted with heartbreak. You've entered the tragic world of famous fakes and tragic believers, the inevitable casualties of the Victorian spiritualist boom. Across from you sits a man clutching a frame photo. Next to him, a woman stares at the medium like she's holding her entire reason for getting out of bed. These are not tourists of the spirit world, these are devotees. And that's the thing no one talks about at the souvenir stalls or in the academic reports. Belief can break you. Victorian spiritualism produced its fair share of scandals, and you're about to witness one unfold. The medium tonight is young, nervous, and surrounded by growing whispers. Last week she was caught hiding a bell under her skirts. 2 weeks ago, someone found a pile of spirit letters in her writing desk. Same ink, same spelling errors. But she insists she's innocent, that the spirits speak when they choose, and the believers, they defend her. Because to admit she's a fraud would mean admitting the last 10 years of mourning, of hope, of whispered names in the dark, were just stagecraft. That the sobs in the night were echoes, not messages. The heartbreak runs deep. Take Mina Marjorie Crandon, the famous Boston medium who dazzled scientific circles in the 1920s. She produced ectoplasm, levitating bells, and spirit voices. For a while, she had it all. Respect. Fame. Even a committee of researchers evaluating her for the coveted Scientific Proof of Mediumship badge. Not a real badge, but spiritually close. And then came the unravelling. Skeptics infiltrated her séances. Hidden flashlights caught suspicious hand movements. Investigators discovered that the spirit fingerprints she'd conjured on wax matched her dentist brother's. The final blow came when a disembodied voice asked for a pencil, and someone found it already hidden in the cabinet. Still, many defended her. One prominent researcher allegedly destroyed incriminating photos because he couldn't bear to believe she'd lied. Historians still argue whether Marjorie was fully fraudulent or if she truly believed in her abilities. That's the tragedy. Many mediums did believe. They weren't always con artists. Some may have experienced trance states, unconscious movements, vivid hallucinations interpreted as visitations. Belief is a powerful drug, especially when everyone around you is grieving. And then there's the audience, the tragic believers, like Sir Oliver Lodge, a distinguished physicist who lost his son Raymond in World War I. Lodge became obsessed with contacting him. He claimed to receive messages, full of personal details from mediums. He published a book, Raymond, or Life and Death, describing his son's afterlife in intricate detail. Clothes, routines, even the style of furniture in the hereafter. Skeptics pointed out that most of this could have been guessed, fished out, or fabricated, but to Lodge, it was everything. A bridge across the impossible, or consider the case of William Thomas Stead, a crusading journalist and early believer in automatic writing. He founded the Julia Bureau, which claimed to transcribe letters from a spirit named Julia Ames. Stead took these writings very seriously, until he died aboard the Titanic in 1912. Afterward, mediums began reporting messages from him. Julia and William, reunited in the afterlife, now running their celestial newsletter together. A tidy ending. Too tidy. The public, too, eventually grew weary. Fraud after fraud chipped away at the mystique. Exposés filled the newspapers. Mediums were caught using fishing line, glowing paint, trained accomplices. Some even faced prison time. And yet, some audiences clung to belief. Because sometimes the lie is kinder than the truth. One of the most infamous scandals involved the Davenport brothers, American performers who claimed spirits tied and untied them inside a sealed cabinet. For years they wowed audiences, until a particularly nosy guest yanked open the curtain mid-show. No ghosts, just the brothers, untying themselves with toes and smirks. But here's the punchline. The crowd booed the man who exposed them. You see it tonight too. The medium flubs. The trumpet hits the floor. Someone whispers, "She's not in trance, she's just tired." You almost say something, but then the woman beside you speaks. My daughter's voice came through last week. She told me to stop crying in the kitchen. She knew about the bracelet. Her eyes are wet, her hands still. She's not angry, she's grateful. You don't say a word. The line between deception and compassion is blurrier than ever. You walk home tonight under a sky that feels unusually heavy. You've seen the ropes behind the curtain. You've read the case studies. You've watched ghosts fall flat onto the carpet and get up coughing. And yet, part of you still believes. Not in the trickery, but in the need for the trick. Because sometimes, belief isn't about what's real, it's about what helps you keep breathing. By now, you've seen the Victorian obsession with spirits take every imaginable shape. Tool apparitions, spirit photographs, flying trumpets, even haunted toast. You've wandered through elite drawing rooms and dingy séance parlors, observed grief turn into ritual, and watched rational minds bend in the candlelight of a good ghost story. But tonight, the setting shifts again. You're no longer in the heart of London or the parlour of a brooding widow in Bath. You're in a British colony, far from the fog and gas lamps. The air here is thick with humidity. Monkeys chatter from the treetops. Incense curls from shrines nearby. And in the shade of a wide veranda, a group of Victorian spiritualists fans themselves with lace handkerchiefs and speaks in hushed awe about the mystical East. Welcome to the complicated and often uncomfortable realm of colonial hauntings and cross-cultural theft. Victorian spiritualism wasn't just a domestic drama, it was a global export, and more often than not, it came with a generous dose of cultural appropriation, wrapped in mystic exotica. You're attending a séance tonight hosted by a British couple stationed in India. The medium claims to channel not just British spirits, but ancient Eastern ascended masters. Wise entities, she says, are thousands of years old and fluent in Sanskrit. When asked to say something in Sanskrit, she clears her throat and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a grocery list. Everyone claps anyway. This séance, and hundreds like it, draws on a broader Victorian fantasy. The belief that Eastern cultures held secret spiritual knowledge, lost to the materialistic West. British spiritualists didn't just admire Asian religious traditions. They absorbed, rebranded, and often distorted them. Terms like karma, chakra, and reincarnation started appearing in spiritualist literature, stripped of context and folded into séances like exotic seasoning. Buddhist meditation was reimagined as magnetic concentration. Hindu deities were recast as high-ranking spirit guides. Historians still argue whether this was genuine fascination or just colonial arrogance with better incense. A key figure here is Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society in 1875. A chain-smoking Russian mystic with an incredible talent for self-promotion, Blavatsky claimed to have travelled across Tibet and India, where she allegedly studied with hidden masters known as the Mahatmas. According to her, these Mahatmas existed on a higher spiritual plane and communicated via astral projection and mysterious letters that appeared out of nowhere. Some of these letters, when examined, were found hidden under cushions. But again, belief isn't always about the delivery method. Blavatsky's writings mashed together Eastern philosophies, Western occultism, and a healthy sprinkle of Atlantis. She argued for spiritual evolution, that souls progress through lifetimes, eventually achieving enlightenment. For many Victorians, this was revelatory, especially those disillusioned by traditional Christianity. Here was a system that explained suffering, justified inequality, unfortunately, and promised spiritual growth. Also, it let you say Namaste without knowing what it meant. You listen as tonight's host reads from Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. He pronounces Brahman like bramble and compares karma to a well-behaved postman. You nod politely, but wince internally. The real tragedy. While Victorian spiritualists borrowed heavily from Eastern traditions, they rarely listened to the people who actually practiced them. Local religious leaders were often dismissed as superstitious natives. Indigenous rituals were viewed as quaint or half-formed. British mediums claimed to speak on behalf of Hindu gods and Buddhist monks, even while the British Empire suppressed local religions, censored spiritual texts, and flattened rich traditions into decorative background noise. You pass a table of pamphlets titled The Oriental Spirit World with chapters like Buddha as a British Gentleman and Why the Dalai Lama Might Approve of Our Table Tipping. It's enough to make you want to knock over the ectoplasm bowl, and yet it wasn't all mockery or malice. Some spiritualists did try to understand. Scholars like Annie Besant, a former radical and later president of the Theosophical Society, actually moved to India, embraced Indian independence, and studied Vedanta seriously. She learned Sanskrit. She supported Indian reformers. She even helped launch India's Home Rule movement. Others followed her example, albeit more clumsily. You read journals where British mystics described their journeys through Burma or Sri Lanka, collecting spiritual energy the way others collect stamps. It's earnest, it's awkward, it's colonial. You peek into another room where a group of mediums is attempting to summon an Egyptian priestess named Neftara. They chant in faux accented tones, surrounded by props scavenged from a museum gift shop. You recognise the headpiece from a novelty costume catalogue. You weep gently into your tea. But what's astonishing is how long this lasted. Long after Victorian dresses were packed away and spirit trumpets rusted, the echoes of this spiritual scavenging remained. Modern New Age movements, heavily shaped by Victorian spiritualism's mishandling of Eastern ideas. Yoga studios with chakras charted like subway maps. That's Theosophy's stamp. Crystal shops invoking Tibetan healing energy without context. Victorian colonial mysticism all over again. As you leave the veranda and step into the warm night air, you can't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, the Victorian spiritualists genuinely sought wisdom beyond their rigid traditions. On the other, they often treated entire cultures like spiritual theme parks, visiting, sampling, and repackaging without depth or respect. Tonight, the moon is full, the monkeys have quieted, the air smells of jasmine and old books. Somewhere, a medium is still talking about third eye activation. You shake your head. The ghosts here don't need summoning, they're watching. You wake up the next morning back in London feeling a little displaced, as if part of you is still standing on that veranda, listening to the rustle of banana leaves and ghostly mispronunciations of nirvana. But the city doesn't wait for your spiritual hangover. The fog is thicker than ever. Horse hooves echo down the cobblestones. And just outside a bookshop window, a crowd has gathered to gawk at a colourful new poster. You step closer. It's an advertisement for a play, a haunted house, a mysterious medium, a glowing ghost bride. The tagline, based on actual séances. You smile. Welcome to the long shadow of spiritualism, the world of occult legacy and pop culture. If the Victorians had Instagram, every medium would be verified. Every haunted hotel would have its own hashtag. But since they didn't, their stories, the ghosts, the rituals, the questionable spirit selfies, slipped into the next best medium, fiction, and from there, into everything. You enter the bookshop, past stacks of penny dreadfuls and serialised novels with titles like The Phantom Governess and Séance at Sundown. On the display table, the picture of Dorian Gray, Dracula, The Woman in White, Carmilla. All works that pull from the spiritualist craze, either to embrace it or to twist it into something even more thrilling. Victorian writers were obsessed with the supernatural. Even those who didn't believe in ghosts wrote about them. Spectres were metaphor, mood, and sometimes outright plot device. Possession, mesmerism, haunted portraits, these weren't just spooky gimmicks. They were reflections of real social anxieties, loss, class tension, female agency, colonial guilt. Every ghost carried baggage, and the readers loved it. Historians still argue whether this literary boom helped spiritualism thrive or gently mocked it into cultural decline. Either way, the spiritualist aesthetic, the trances, the gaslight, the veils, became immortal. Take Sherlock Holmes, a character born of the rational mind and yet surrounded by the irrational. Conan Doyle, we've established, was a full-blown spiritualist, but Holmes, he's the ultimate skeptic. Every haunted case ends with a logical explanation. No ghosts, just greed, trickery, and fog machines. And yet Holmes exists because of that ghostly atmosphere. Without Victorian spiritualism, there's no tension to resist, no stage to unveil the trick. Even Doyle's disbeliefs were haunted by his beliefs. You thumb through an illustrated edition of Dracula and realise this isn't just a vampire story, it's a séance with blood, hypnosis, astral projection, sacred symbols, all straight from spiritualist circles, reframed with fangs. And then there's the theatre. Ghost plays were everywhere. Melodramas staged with trapdoors and smoke machines, illusions pulled from magic shows, mediums were hired to advise on authentic haunting procedures. At one performance of The Bells, an audience member fainted when a disembodied voice shouted, "Guilty," from the rafters. The line between séance and stage blurred completely, and that blurring never stopped. Fast forward through the decades, early horror films like The Uninvited and The Haunting echo Victorian ghost tropes. Every time someone says, "Is anybody there?" into a dark hallway, you're hearing the voice of a medium from 1883. Modern ghost hunting shows, Ouija boards at slumber parties, horror novels with moaning corridors, they all descend from Victorian parlours and table-turning nights. You glance at a rack of new tarot cards, printed with gilded edges and velvet pouches. You flip one over, the High Priestess. The illustration is pure Golden Dawn, robes, symbols, the veil of mystery. The woman behind the counter offers you a smile. "We just got those in," she says, hand-inked, supposedly based on a lost Victorian deck. Of course they are. The aesthetics have outlived the belief. Ghosts may be optional now, but the vibe is eternal, and yet belief still lingers. You can feel it in the way people lower their voices in haunted spaces, in the candles left at old gravestones, in the popularity of psychic hotlines and past life regressions. We've swapped gas lamps for LEDs, but the questions remain the same. Is anyone there? Can they hear me? Can I talk back? You step out of the shop and stroll past a tattoo parlour offering custom sigil work, a bar called the Séance Room, and a boutique selling handmade planchettes. You're not in 1890 anymore. But you're not far from it either. The Victorian spiritualists left behind more than stories. They left behind frameworks, ways to explore the unknown, grieve creatively, pretend meaning into mess, and we're still using them. Every time a medium appears in a Netflix series, every time a teenage girl uses a pendulum to ask if her crush likes her, every time you knock 3 times, just in case. You pause at a cafe window. Inside, a young woman stares at a tarot spread, looking hopeful. Her friend whispers, wide-eyed. Outside, your reflection lingers just a second too long before following you. The fog's back tonight, low, slow, and thick enough to blur the edges of lampposts. You move through it like a ghost yourself, familiar now with every creak of wood, every flicker of candlelight, every rustle of tulle that might or might not mean something's watching. You've come a long way through the world of Victorian spiritualism, from mesmerists and toe-cracking sisters, to glamorous ectoplasm displays and sobbing séances, to camera tricks, colonial séances, and women who ruled parlours by channeling ancient voices. But now, as you return to one final séance, this time uninvited, just watching through the frosted glass, you can feel it, the long fade into twilight. Because like all obsessions, the spiritualist frenzy had to end, or at least settle into something quieter. Inside the room, a small group sits around a much-used table. The medium is older now, tired. The tricks aren't as sharp. The gaslight flickers. Someone sneezes. It's a bit mundane. No glowing orbs, no sudden gusts, just candlelight and hopeful silence. It wasn't one moment that ended it. It was a slow erosion. The great mediums had fallen one by one, some revealed as frauds, others lost in scandal. The Society for Psychical Research had become more cautious, more clinical. Houdini's relentless debunking had left audiences more guarded, and the world itself was changing. The 20th century crept in, bringing war, cynicism, psychology. The radio made ghosts seem less impressive. Freud replaced the spirit world with the subconscious. Suddenly hearing voices didn't mean you were gifted, it meant you needed a specialist. People still held séances, of course, still whispered to the dark, but it wasn't fashionable anymore, not respectable, not something you'd brag about at the opera. Historians still argue whether the movement collapsed under its own weight, or was simply absorbed into other cultural tides. New Age mysticism, spiritual self-help, paranormal tourism. Maybe the spirits just got bored. You step back from the window. Inside, someone speaks. A name, a question, a plea. The others listen. Nothing happens, not at first. Then the table trembles. Just a little. You wonder, is it real this time? Does it matter? What remains is the echo, the rituals, the language, the longing, the structure of belief, even if the spirits have stopped RSVPing. And for all the fraud and spectacle, for all the cheesecloth and coin tricks, there's something oddly comforting in it all. The idea that the people you lose aren't truly lost, that death isn't silence, it's just static. And if you try hard enough, if you dim the lights, hold your breath and ask nicely, maybe, just maybe, someone will answer. You head back to your room. The air is cooler now, quieter. You pass a mirror and, for a moment, you think there's a figure just behind your shoulder. It's gone when you look again. But something lingers, a presence, a possibility. You've reached the end of the séance circuit, but the questions it raised are still flickering. And maybe that's the real ghost story. Not the things that go bump in the night, but the parts of ourselves we leave behind looking for meaning in the dark. Now, take a breath. Let it out slowly. The candles have gone out. The chairs are empty. The séance circle has scattered into the fog, their silhouettes fading one by one. There's nothing left now but the quiet shuffle of memory. Your memory. Let your thoughts soften. Imagine the old parlour you sat in so many times, the velvet drapes, the worn carpet, the table that never quite stopped trembling. The air still smells faintly of lilacs and ash. Whatever you believe, or don't, the people who gathered in those rooms believed fiercely. They reached for something bigger, something beyond. Whether they touched it or only pretended to, they left a mark. One made not of fact, but of feeling. Let the sounds of the city dim. Let the ghosts settle. No more Tool, no more trumpets, no more toe cracking or floating furniture. Just the hush. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from something deeper, something waiting. You lie still now. Let your body grow heavier. Let the floor beneath you feel sturdy, real, grounding. The veil is drawn, but gently now, not with fear, but with familiarity. If someone you miss is listening tonight, they already know. And if they whisper back, you'll hear it in your dreams. Sweet dreams, my friend. 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 Sweet dreams, my friend.